Hello, welcome to our conversation. I'm Rachel Woody-Pumford. I'm the Director of Programming for the Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum, and I'm joined today with Andrea Bazemore, who's going to be talking to us about teaching social justice to kids.
Yeah, hi guys. I'm so glad that I could be here today. I have known Rachel since I was in kindergarten, so it's really cool to just be reunited with her and talk about our mutual interests. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, so to give everyone background, Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum is a Northwest Arkansas-based nonprofit with a mission to cultivate the fashion industry in Arkansas. We do this through education, with programming, both in person, pre-COVID-19, and now through videos. We're able to have speakers come and speak on areas of their expertise. We also offer production grants for designers and Arkansas-based creatives for events like Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week. We have mentorship opportunities for aspiring models, hairstylists, makeup artists, photographers, videographers, and all other creatives. And we also work on building platforms to amplify voices of local creatives. And Andrea Bazemore, as she said, we've known each other since we were in kindergarten.
Yes, we have.
She's grown up to be a super powerful advocate for the community. And she's also the founder of her own education and curriculum company called The Black Apple. She is currently receiving her master's in education from Johns Hopkins University in early childhood education and teaching. She's taught for years through Teach for America in Tulsa, as well in charter and public schools in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And she's been featured in Medium, Latina Magazine, USA Today. She's been on BET and CBS to discuss education. It's really, she's just a powerhouse who knows her stuff on education and social justice. So I'll let her tell you a little bit about her curriculum that she's been working on.
Yeah, well, thank you, Rachel. Like Rachel said, I've been a teacher for about 6 years, and it'll be 6 years in August. And when I started teaching, I realized, I just started teaching from a textbook, just like what your regular teacher would be instructing. In that way, education really hasn't changed. A lot of teachers are still teaching through textbooks. We call them basal readers in English language arts. And what I was finding was teaching directly from this basal reader, from this workbook, from this textbook, it was missing a lot of substance as far as what my students needed. It didn't really relate to my students' experiences, not only just being a low socioeconomic status school, but a school that taught primarily Black students. I also had a school that had a significant Indigenous population as well. And it was definitely missing the mark on every indicator, as well as my Latinx students. Knowing that they weren't getting the recognition, the appreciation, and the representation that they needed, I started to embark on this question, okay, what happens if you teach social justice? What happens if kids are represented? And I really started that my second year of teaching, and I saw significant results in and around academic achievement. And more than that, I saw my students really understand themselves and have a better self-concept. And so when I came back to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where I'm from, and I started to teach in a charter school, instead of teaching third grade, I started at the beginning of where their school started, which was kindergarten. That was the lowest grade that my school had. And I had this question of, what if we teach from a social justice perspective starting at the beginning, and really having really rigorous education as well. So at the beginning of the school year, I taught Martin Luther King. So typically teachers wait all the way until January to teach Martin Luther King. But we taught Martin Luther King in September, which is at the very beginning of our school year. We taught Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, because my school was about half Black and half Latinx. Then we really started looking into the civil rights movement. So we really started that first half of the year really understanding social justice and teaching from a social justice perspective as far as like gaining knowledge. And then the second semester, we really focused on action. So around that time, the conversion from plastic straws to paper straws was something really big. in the news. And so my students really brainstormed how they could reinvent straws and re-engineer straws. They took it upon themselves at recess without me prompting. They wanted to do more recycling. They were really interested in the news. And what that translated to was them having really strong critical thinking skills. So their critical thinking skills resonated in their reading. So they would make observations around race, gender, justice, and texts that had on the surface nothing to do with race, justice, gender, anything like that. So they would really dig deeper in the text. So they might say things like, hey, Miss Bazemore, I don't see myself represented in this text. So this book could do better by having X, Y, and Z. Or they might say something like, oh, Miss Bazemore, I realize that this book is about sports, but there are very few girls in this text. So they would say these things unprompted. And so they were using their critical thinking skills. And that also translated in math. And obviously in science and social studies as well. So my students actually started school at a pre-K level, and they ended school at a mid first grade level to all the way to end of second grade level. My highest achieving student started on a kindergarten level and ended on a fourth grade level. So I saw that inequity was being closed, achievement gaps were being closed, opportunity gaps were being closed because they got so much exposure to things that they haven't had previously, and decided to write my own curriculum based off of what I saw, things that I was doing in the classroom. And so I just put out my first kindergarten science curriculum. It's about, so I go standard by standard. So that my first set is about the 5 senses. And now next I'm working on solid, liquid, and gas, as well as motion. So really looking at curriculum from a different perspective. The curriculum world has a very few representation as far as women, especially Black women, and especially people of color in general. The curriculum world is very white, and so just disrupting that space so that we see more representation and allow for better achievement of kids.
That's awesome. It's really great to hear that kids, when they have something that they're interested in learning, can excel so much. Like you said, I remember a lot of the books that we read in school as kids, like the characters weren't diverse.
No, absolutely not.
White or default white, or unspecified, but it wasn't treated like, oh, yeah, they might be a person of color. Like, this protagonist could be Black, but either didn't say, or would be, a white character on the cover.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's really cool. So someone who's not been in school in a while and doesn't yet have kids who are in elementary school, what are some things that you see that are currently missing from the school system when you're just doing the BESL level teaching?
Yeah, so some things that are missing at the school, so I'll talk particularly like just brick and mortar school. We're starting to change our language in education to specify if it's a virtual school or brick and mortar, which is really interesting. That's a change that's probably spurred by COVID. But just going into a school and looking to see if people of color are represented, period. So a lot of times I'll walk into the school and I see zero representation of students, what they look like. So that might be all the way from posters. There might be posters that are very generic, or posters that only have white faces on them. That translate all the way in going to teachers' rooms. If I'm looking at a teacher's room and I'm looking at their decorations that they probably got from a Michael's, a Lakeshore Learning, another teacher store, a Joann's, a lot of those decorations that teachers have are not diverse. And so just from a surface point going in and I'm observing, I don't really see a lot of representation of anything that is other than white. So that's the first thing that I would look at, and that I would caution people who have children, especially children of color, and especially if you've got if you've got children who are a different race from you. for whatever reason, definitely looking at that approach. You want to see yourself represented in the school, and you want to see your kids represented. I think another thing that happens in school spaces that is not often talked about is that people of color are often represented in kind of traumatized ways. So if the only time that you're talking about people of color is in February or January, talking about Martin Luther King, talking about the civil rights, talking about oppression, talking about slavery, if that's the only time you are being represented, that is coming from a traumatized narrative, right? So we want to have books that just talk about the joy of being yourself, the joy of having the Black experience, the Latinx experience, whatever it may be. So not looking at it from an oppression point of view, but looking at it as a celebratory point of view. So really inspecting your books as well. And I would also say that making sure that just because you have a Black face in your narrative doesn't mean that you're accurately representing kids. So what I always recommend books in my curriculum, and one of the things that I look for is a person of color that is at the forefront of the narrative. So just because you have a Black face, a person who a face that is you're not sure what race they are, so you kind of like loop them in the people of color bracket. That's not true representation. That's what we would call tokenism. So looking for that and really investigating that. And I think the last point of view that I would say is that there are a lot of books that do feature people of color, but sometimes the writers and the illustrators are not people of color. So I like to say that anything, this stems from disability rights activists, and the phrase, and I always butcher this phrase, but the general gist of the phrase is nothing without us is for us. And so what I recommend and I always look for are authors, and at least the author or illustrator is a person of color. And that is super important because there's a lot of research that has to go into the narrative. And sometimes you don't know what exactly you should look for. So a really good author-illustrator pairing that I like is Don Tate and Chris Barton. Don Tate wrote, he's an illustrator, and he wrote Lonnie Johnson, the Super Soaker book. And so what they did is they paired together, and there are certain artistic elements that you might not think of, but are super important to the African American narrative. What skin tone are they? What outfits did they wear? What access did they have? What kind of materials did they use? So that's something that you might not know if you're not a person of color, especially if you're not a person of color that identifies with the character that you're writing about. And that also influenced Chris Barton, who is white, his approach to the words that he used. So that pairing is especially essential. And I think that definitely correlates to what you guys are working towards as far as an arts-based education program, because those things totally matter, and they really shape the narrative.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you talked about representation, because that's something we focus a lot on in our organization. Mm-hmm. We try to work with companies that are local that work with people of color, and not just as a token, as you said. Like, you can look through local boutiques and you can see, like, who are they casting for their models? Are they casting the one Black girl that they know over and over and over again because they don't know any more people of color? Or are they, like, looking in the community and casting people who represent what we actually look like as humans?
Absolutely.
We talk about at Northwest Arkansas Fashion specifically for casting for the community. Like, if you submit a model list that's all white girls, we're gonna say, like, hey, like, you know, consider why did you do this? Like, you know, see what's behind it. Because sometimes you look at these, it's like, oh, it's based on sizing. And you're like, okay, well, maybe you should make sizes that are more accommodating for hips, or for chests, or for models that are taller or shorter, or women with disabilities, or men with disabilities, or people of color. Like, there's always a way to have a diverse show if you are purposefully, intentionally, respectfully doing it.
Absolutely. I had a class that I taught. It was about we just used the Met Gala theme about time, fashion, and duration. So we talked about that in a class, and I talked about lighting as they were taking their pictures. And I told them about how a lot of Black people weren't cast. It was more primarily in film, I believe, but it definitely translates to the fashion narrative. A lot of Black people weren't cast, or especially a lot of dark-skinned Black people weren't cast because people didn't know how to light them. And so you would have someone who was very fair-skinned coming and acting or doing whatever they needed for lighting, and a darker skinned person would stand next to them, and it would either wash out the fair skinned person, or you couldn't accurately see the darker skinned person. So things like that absolutely matter, and they reflect how my kids who my kids can look up to because they're in that popular culture, or even just someone who's sitting at a local fashion show looking to see themselves walking down the runway. It affects how you view yourself, definitely. So those questions and those discussions are so important.
No, I 100% agree. So one of the questions I had is just a general, like, what is social justice? What does it look like when you're teaching it to young kids? Because kindergarten to fifth grade, that's, 5 to 11 years old.
Yeah. So I think everyone has a different perspective of what social justice is. And I think your context definitely shifts and frames how you answer what social justice is. But to me, what social justice is looking at the world, looking at the environment, looking at the viewpoint that you view a certain entity or narrative, looking at it holistically, right? Looking at it from a social, emotional, economic perspective, looking at it from the point of view of skin color, ethnicity, race, gender identity, sexual orientation as well. Also, looking at something from a perspective of the mental health, the economics, and really getting the full picture and scope and sequence of what something is. So it's not just taking something at face value. It's really looking at the underneath layers of it, opening it up and really peeling back the layers throughout all of those categories, and really inspecting to see that if it is equitable, if it is just, or meaning fair, is it from a perspective of liberation, or is it something that needs to be transformed so that it can be accessible to everyone? So I think if you're taking that point of view, you're really taking the time, the space, and the investigating the resources needed so that people can be holistically valued and appreciated.
I like that. That's a
good
no problem. Like you said, that, if all you learn about Black history is in the form of slavery, it is just a trauma narrative that's
absolutely
repeated over and over. And we don't always, as a society, do a good job lifting the more positive narratives.
Absolutely, yeah. Or only seeing, something for only seeing something as negative. So I will just from that example, I am someone, I can't watch movies that have to deal with slavery. It evokes a trauma response for me, and it'll put me in a state of mind that is not saying that it's not a good state of frame of mind, but it will put me in a space where it's very hard for me to get back to reality. So everyone is different, but again, if I've only heard that narrative of every February, I know I've got to hear about slavery, that's going to affect my mental health, it's going to affect my economics, it's going to affect everything. So really investigating that.
Yeah. And teaching kids more than just that same story over and over again, and teaching
Yes,
like, here's what happens next, and here's how things change
exactly.
and grow, and
Yes,
here's how the movement looks like now.
absolutely, absolutely.
We've been talking a lot as a team for the Arkansas Exhibition Forum about like what happens next. Like now
Hmm.
that people are beginning to pay attention, where are we
Hmm.
going to go next? How are we going to continue supporting? How are we going to keep the movement alive until we have
Absolutely.
the rights that we believe everyone should have?
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
it's good to know that hopefully in the future, as schools move more towards a social justice education, that they're willing to add in
Yes,
narratives.
absolutely, absolutely.
Until we get to that beautiful, wonderful place where the whole world is teaching wonderfully.
Right.
What are some resources that parents and teachers can use now to help to have these conversations with their kids on an age appropriate level?
Yeah, so I always start with knowing about your heritage, knowing about your history is where I would start primarily. And there's a reason for that, right? So typically, when we are teaching from teaching someone else's history, we tend to reflect and we tend to ask questions about our own history, right? So I thought about this as I was teaching. I was teaching Asian American Pacific Islander Month last year, and I was like, you know what? I really don't know about the intersection between Asian American lives and Black lives. So let me research that. So I began to research different organizations and the history behind Asian Americans fighting for civil rights. And there was a narrative behind that that I didn't really realize. And so it reframed how I would approach it. And it allowed me to, one, be recognized that my community and the Asian American Pacific Islander community actually worked hand in hand. So I felt validated in myself. And that allowed me to look beyond and ask deeper questions about Asian American Pacific Islanders.
Mm-hmm.
And it allowed me to ask deeper and more thought-provoking questions. So whatever ethnicity you are, so even if you identify as white, I would really investigate and look at what is your history behind that label, right? So that white label was, if you go back in history, that was just meant to easily categorize people. And so people who would more so identify with Italian, with Irish, with other ethnic identities, just got uh, molded into this social category of whiteness, right? So you've got to identify what is your history, who are your people, right? Because it's a lot more than just white. So look at that. Look at the allies that have helped other different communities, because that will, one, allow you to see that, okay, I've got a model that I can look to. Because there are amazing allies out there from every race and every ethnic identity, but you've got to look for that. So first thing I would do is investigate your own history, right? You've got to know yourself first. After that, I would really recommend looking at Teaching Tolerance. That is a really great website. It's more geared towards for teachers, but it gives you so many different resources and so many different lesson plans that are so great and kid-friendly. I would look at Black Lives Matter at school. If you're looking for how to frame that conversation with kids, there are so many books and texts out there that will help you reframe, or not reframe, but help you and guide you in the discussion that is kid friendly. So I would definitely look at different books that will help you talk about race and just talk about things that are going on. I think books are a really great way to expose your kids to things that are happening. And I would also look at PBS. PBS is a really great resource, and they have done a really great job investigating and exploring race in a way that's historical as well as powerful. and reaffirming. So I would definitely look at those resources as if you're looking to try and teach your kids about the history of other people. And those are resources that I've used myself just to gain knowledge about different identities so that I'm better equipped with my knowledge.
That's great. You also mentioned books. Would you mind talking a little bit about Diverse Kids Read?
Yes. So Diverse Kids Read is a nonprofit that I started. I will be building that out more as I frame my curriculum as well. So I started Diverse Kids Read because I was a teacher, or am a teacher, and I also was a kid in school. And everyone remembers Scholastic book fairs and how much joy they bring you. And just getting that little paper newsletter and just being able to see the books. Not a lot has changed from when we were kids as far as the Scholastic book fair, as in the excitement, joy area, like that is great. But there's also something that happens with Scholastic book fairs. So particularly if you're in a Title I school, there are not a lot of books that are affordable. And so that's something that I saw, and I would have to tell kids that they had to go home without a book, or they would get the like free books that Scholastic sometimes gives you. And a lot of those books are not friendly to those who identify as person of color. And so I thought about a way to disrupt that. So I created Diverse Kids Read. So what I do is I get books and I sell them for anywhere from $1/4 to $3. So $3 is the maximum I will sell a book for. And I go in and I set up at whatever organization it is. So it could be a school, it could be a fair, whatever it may be. And so for schools, there's a flat fee, and I will do, I have a team that comes out and they do all the sales. Librarians can go on and still do their reading classes while there's the book fair that's going on. And all the proceeds get distributed to that school. So after there's that flat fee, which is very low, the funds get distributed to the school. So that way we're disrupting the inequitable nature of Scholastic, as well as allowing kids to have affordable books that they can have. And the diverse part in Diverse Kids Read is that all of the books feature a person of color as the lead narrative or the protagonist, as well as making sure that there are books that focus on gender equality, sexual orientation, and any other group that definitely has been disfranchised against. So that is at the forefront of all of the books. So that's where it's a little bit more selective in the books that we carry.
I think that's really great because, like you said, I mean, Scholastic book fair is like the most fun. I have a friend who's a librarian at a local elementary school, and
exactly,
it is her favorite and least favorite event simultaneously. Librarian.
Exactly.
But again, like those books aren't cheap. Like she says that like there's frequently kids that she has to say like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you don't have enough money to buy this book." And so having books that are up to $3 that kids can afford with their extra money that they earn from their allowance.
Yes.
They can have a book that they own where they can see themselves represented by the lead character is really important.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, I have a few more questions for you.
Perfect.
One of them is, you touched a little bit on it, that now there's the brick and mortar schools and the online schools. How do you see those interplaying as education moves forward beyond the coronavirus?
Oh, absolutely. So I think one of the things that we're seeing, and there's news reports and articles that are also that are claiming this as well. so this is research backed, that there's about 30% of people that are going to be looking to not go back to public school or a private or charter school, that they're going to stick with a virtual school. And there are a lot of reasons why. I can tell you from my own personal experience teaching is that students who might be identified as ADHD have a better success if they've got an instructor that works with them well. They've got a higher chance of success because they can do the classes on their own time. And so students who do have ADHD, students who are gifted, and students who might fall in other categories are finding that virtual school works for them because they can do it at their own pace. They can ask a little bit more about their individual needs. And so that's something that's really exciting. I think on the flip side, you've got a huge inequitable problem, right? You've got people who don't have access to internet, people who don't have, if they've got internet, don't have access to a great connection. I lived in downtown Dallas, and then I also moved to South Dallas. And when I moved to South Dallas, our connection was completely different. There were people who just for fun would like to shoot out the little internet box, and so our internet would go down constantly, and that's something that I didn't have to worry about when I lived in downtown Dallas or any of the suburbs. So that's a definitely an inequitable problem that we see, and it happens everywhere. And so that's something that we're going to have to solve. There's going to have to be something that that we come to an agreement on as a country of what is our digital right. So there's going to be a huge movement of, you've got human rights, and you're going to have a digital rights movement. And I believe that homeschooling is going to continuously increase. So you're going to see a whole nother movement of the school choice movement that includes homeschool kids. And so that's something that's going to be really interesting in the educational landscape, and how we deal with that is going to really change education, not just for kids that are in school now, for probably this generation and the next.
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one of those things that just a few months ago, we wouldn't have been thinking like, oh yeah, of course kids are going to want to do virtual. Or now that parents have homeschooled their kids, they're now like, oh yeah, this is a thing I can do that I think is best for my kid.
Exactly.
It's interesting that all these options have now opened up for families to consider.
You're completely correct. Absolutely.
For the community, for people like me who don't currently have kids, what can we do to help the school systems and teachers and educators get to having more socially just curriculum, both in school, whether it's brick and mortar or virtual online? I know you do classes on OutSchool where you talk about social justice. We have one coming up for answering questions so that Black people don't have to.
Yes.
How can we as a community get that word out to people so that way they know that there are these resources for them?
Yeah, so I think just being aware of these resources that are available is the first step, and sharing resources that maybe you come up on your news feed, sharing resources that you find on Instagram, Facebook, whatever it may be. So sharing that with your network and with people that do have kids will also help you know that that there's things available when or if you decide to have the choice of kids. So I think that's super important. Also staying up to date with education that's happening in your locality is also important. So education shapes your community. So it's not just for the people who are having kids, it's the people who are going to grow in your neighborhood. It's the people who you are going to hire or who are going to work or you're going to work for. So education truly does transform a community. So staying up to date to education is probably one of the best things that you can do for your community, as well as looking at your district that you live in, and looking at who is being voted into your school boards, and staying up to date in that way. So using your voting power is something that is truly transformative that you can do, that will change the landscape of your neighborhood, your community, and also your state, as well as our nation as well. So those who don't have kids, those who are thinking about having kids, those who know that they don't want to have kids, still stay up to date, because it's really going to transform the people around you, and make our world just so much better.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. For everyone who's interested, Andrea's website at theblackapple.org, she has an ebook where she talks about the beginner's guide to teaching social justice, and that she also lists Instagram accounts you should follow, books that you can read, and websites that you can use to further your knowledge about social justice and teaching it with children. There's also on her website, she has a blog post about creating your philosophy, where she has a link to civil rights and human rights leaders and their written excerpts on what they believe is the purpose of education. And I'll also link down below to articles that she's been featured in where she talks about education. She's talked a lot about the digital inequality for internet right now. And so she's got a lot of interesting insight, and we'd love to have her again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I forgot I had all that. I'll be real. But thank you so much. It has been such a joy and such a pleasure to be here with you. It's like a mini reunion, so I'm so excited. And I cannot wait to see what you guys are putting out there for your community. And I just wish you the best, and continued blessing and grace.